My name is Sheila Coronel. I am director of the Stabile program at the Columbia Journalism School. That's the program that trains students for the Investigative Reporting Specialization. We began in 2006, and since then, our graduates have done amazing work. They work in the US, they work overseas, they work for big newspapers like the New York Times or the Washington Post. They work for small papers all around the country. They work for big wire agencies like Reuters and Bloomberg. They work for television. They work for nonprofits. Our students come here with a wide range of experience. Some have had a few years of journalism, some no journalism at all. Some have worked in other professions, and some are fresh out of college. But what unites them is patience, perseverance, and an unwavering belief that journalists are the watchdog of society. So I'm here today to talk about the Investigative Reporting Specialization. We call it the Stabile program here at the Journalism School, and also to talk about investigative reporting. With me today, our two students, two graduates from the class of 2013. To my right is Caroline Chen, who came to the program fresh out of college. She majored in English and mathematics. And to my left is Emmanuel Felton, who was already working for a nonprofit, the Southern Poverty Law Center, when he came to Columbia. So I'd like to ask each of them, why did you decide to study investigative reporting? Caroline.
So I think what motivates me to be a reporter is to tell stories for people who don't have the platform to have a voice, and who may not have the power to respond when there is injustice done to them. And I think one of the most important roles of the media is to be that check to power. And so I think with that motivation, I was interested in investigative journalism in the first place. And while I had done some internships at various weeklies when I was in college, I didn't have those skills. So that's what brought me to the Stabile program in the first place, yeah.
What about you, Emmanuel? You've already been doing some sort of investigative work with the Southern Poverty Law Center, right?
Right, yeah, I think like Caroline, that sense of justice was really important for me, right? I mean, so before journalism school, I spent 2 years working with attorneys, essentially, helping them construct lawsuits, finding potential plaintiffs. And I thought I would go to law school, like so many of my colleagues there, and I found the courtroom stuff incredibly dull. But what I did really love was, these connecting policies with real people. And, I spent a lot of time door knocking in places like Mississippi and Alabama, and I really enjoyed that part much more than the legal briefs and such. So that led me pretty naturally to journalism. And yeah, I mean, this idea of holding people accountable was really important to me, and that's how I ended up.
So let's talk about what investigative reporting is, because people are kind of confused. Investigative reporting is like sort of a strange animal that people can't quite put their hands on. What does investigative reporting mean to you?
I think there are two pretty big elements to me. So one, I think investigative reporting exposes wrongdoing, and I think that investigative stories are never ones that you're given or where you're reporting on an event where you're reacting to them. I think investigative reporting is where you're digging up a story that otherwise would not have been told. And then I think the other part, which is what Emmanuel and I were both talking about, is our motivation to be in journalism, is that I think investigative reporting is for the public. And that's the motivation that drives it. Like, you are bringing forward information that is good for the public to know that they otherwise wouldn't have known, and you have that public interest element to it.
Manuel, what do investigative reporters do that are different from what other journalists do?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think some people see it as a set of techniques, right? Like, I don't know, like an investigative interview, or a documents mindset, or like, I don't know, digging through court records. And I think that's a part of it. But I think, I've had stories that are almost entirely interview-based, and I've had stories that are, come from a lot of court records. And I think, like, it's less important, like, what techniques you use, as much as, like, I think it's holding the powerful accountable for wrongdoing, that I think really is the essence of what investigative reporting is.
So it's really more the ethos of journalism, of the role of a belief in the role of what journalists should be doing and the role of journalists in society. Is that Is that it? I mean,
Sure.
the watchdog function. Of
Yeah, I
journalism.
think absolutely, right? Like it's I think there's a lot of great reporting out there. I mean, I work in an area, I write about education, right? And I've done that for 5 or 6 years now. And so much of the reporting is about sort of nebulous wrongdoing, right? Like we know that there are these huge gaps in our society when it comes to race and class and the educational outcomes, right? But I think so much other reporting, it stops there. It's like this is a societal ill with no cause or no apparent cause. And I think what's really important about investigative journalism is going that extra step. Like what decisions at all levels of government are maintaining these systems or exacerbating their effects. And I think that really is the difference between investigative reporting and traditional reporting.
What kind of skills have you found useful in your job as investigative journalist? I mean, I haven't told people yet what you're doing right now, but tell us about your work and what skills you need to be able to do your work. Yeah.
So I think Emmanuel mentioned a lot of the techniques earlier. So,
what are you doing now?
So I'm currently a healthcare reporter at Propublica, and I would say by far the biggest general skill that I think investigative reporters need is just persistence, because these are not stories that people are going to give to you, and I think the best investigative reporters are just dogged reporters, and I think that means that you're so motivated to get to the bottom of something or to hold someone accountable that you're going to go after that government agency until they give you the documents, or you find a smarter way to get around an obstacle to get to that answer. So for example, I previously was at Bloomberg covering a lot of companies, and so I spent a lot of time on LinkedIn. Reaching out to former employees. And the hit rate, if I'm lucky, is maybe 1 out of 10. So
1 out of 10 people you get in touch with.
Will respond. I'm not even saying that they're useful.
Yeah.
And so I will message hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to try to find maybe 5 people who are going to be good sources for me. And I think just having that persistence is a big skill that you need to have. And then the other thing I would say is really important, and I think sometimes doesn't have enough attention paid to it, is the ability to talk to people. Because getting a banker to open up to you is very different from getting, say, the victim of a sexual assault to tell you their story. And this is why I really like being in a newsroom, because I listen to the way other people interview and I learn from them. But I think that human element sometimes can get overlooked when we talk about, the more complicated investigative techniques.
When you talk about complex systems, for example, the human element gets overlooked. Emmanuel, what other skills do Caroline talked about persistence, patience, the ability to work around obstacles and problems.
Yeah, I think
ability to talk to people.
Yeah, I think a big part of it, just echoing what she said, is this idea that this doesn't happen overnight, and it's a long process often to get the stories that you really want to tackle. And
well, what are you doing now, for example, and use that as an example?
So I am currently back here at the journalism school. I'm on a fellowship writing a book about how towns and communities across the country deconstructed laws that would have tackled housing and school segregation. So yeah, I mean, I spend so many days feeling like I am not necessarily making progress on this gigantic goal that I've set.
It's a gigantic project. How do you even start reporting something as big as that?
Well, I think you start it like you report anything, right? Like you start making phone calls. And I think what really is important here is sometimes, like it's not the most exciting thing, but organization in an investigation is so key. And I think it's something that I've learned to do over time. Really laying out everything you have, because even a magazine story, like you hit the end of it and you're fact checking and it's awful if you haven't like laid this foundation of having everything that you gather together in one place.
So has anything you learned in the journalism school been helpful to your work right now?
Yeah, I mean everything, because I came in straight from college, so I can literally say everything has been helpful. But I would say I came in expecting to learn techniques, and I did. Like, I learned how to file a public records request, I learned how to mine data, I learned how to look in court records, and that's what I expected, and I did get that. But I think a more amorphous thing that I got from the Stabile program that has been really meaningful to me has been the discussions we had over what's an investigative story. How do you get from a tip to the point where you have a pitch? Like, when do you even know you probably have a story, which can be difficult to pin down when you're working on something really big. And then perhaps most importantly is what levels of evidence you need to have so that your story can really be bulletproof. And I think having those concepts and conversations are a foundation that when I then went out as a full-time reporter have been things that I've always kept at the back of my mind.
What about you, Emmanuel?
Absolutely. I think the classes I remember most in the Stabile program, we were dissecting great works of investigative journalism, right? Like when Jesse Eisenberg came into class and discussed his work on the financial crisis, like, I'd read all of this work and I would have had no idea how to get from we all saw this happening to the really powerful work that he did. And I think it's just knowing what was possible that made going into a newsroom. I worked at the Hechinger Report for 4 years where they weren't necessarily accustomed to doing investigative work. And I think without the skills that I had gathered here, I would have done a lot of lovely feature reporting while I was there. But the Stabile program really set me up to turn my staff writer job into an investigative reporting job.
One class that I just have a great memory of, which I think speaks to some of the real practical learning you can get at the J School, is we had a day where we had to practice cold calling, and we were cold calling our professor, Jim Mintz. And we had talked about how pretty much nobody wants to be called by an investigative reporter, and most people haven't ever been cold called by a reporter in the first case. So we all had to, in front of all of our classmates, pretend to call Professor Mintz, and he pretty much hung up on all of us. I don't think any of us made it through in the first round, but this is what I do every day now. And so I really remember that class because I realized I really had no idea how to cold call someone who did not want to hear from me.
It's not easy. It's not what you do in your normal life.
Yeah. Most normal people.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. Let's talk about, coming out of school and getting your first job or your first break. What was that like?
So when I graduated from the J School, I interned at the Center for Investigative Reporting, and I worked
in San Francisco.
In San Francisco, yeah, and I worked on a project on armed guards, and I pretty much spent the whole summer making a gigantic database of state-by-state regulations and then FOIAing for state-by-state incidents. And then after that, unfortunately, they didn't have full-time positions open, so I went to Bloomberg, and there I actually got a full-time job as a beat reporter. There was nothing about doing investigative work in my job description. And I think what this program helped me do is, as I built confidence as a healthcare reporter and really got to know my beat, that I started to first bring in investigative techniques into stories that I was doing, maybe features where I'd file public records requests, and then graduated to pitching just full-on investigative stories. And I think that I was really lucky that I had editors that were open to me doing this, but it wasn't an environment where they were like, please do investigative work. And I think that was something I really appreciated from the J School, that I had the confidence to start pitching these stories once I was comfortable in my beat.
So were you able to do, even as a beat reporter, were you able to do investigative reporting?
Yes. So my deal with my editor was, you can do these stories so long as you don't drop the ball on news.
Okay.
Sometimes that was a little bit hectic, but I was happy to have the opportunity to do that, and also to partner with some of the Bloomberg reporters who were on the project's team on healthcare stories. And so that's how I managed to work it in, because I just really wanted to do the work.
And how did you get to Propublica?
So I joined Propublica this year in March, and I just, they had a healthcare reporter position open up, and I ended up, I applied for it and ended up joining Propublica.
Wow.
So,
So in the 5 years, you graduated from college, went to the J School, and then spent 3 years or 4 years,
4 years
at Bloomberg, and then you're now at Propublica.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
What about you, Emmanuel? What have you done since graduation?
Right. So my first job after graduation was right here at the journalism school. There was a great opportunity to do some government accountability reporting about New York City and state. And in that, I really got a chance to dive into this really chaotic big city school system here and the politics around child welfare, and got some great clips where I could show that I knew what to do with data, and I could do an interview to some success. And I got a job at a nonprofit newsroom, the Hechinger Report, that covers inequality in education. And it's when I first got there, it was envisioned as a job where I would be writing a lot of sort of features about education in America.
Right.
And I did that for a while, and I think Caroline's absolutely right. What you do is you start introducing those techniques and pitching stories eventually that take on a more investigative bent.
And why a book?
Oh, right. Well, I think this is a long story, right? We're 60 years into this idea of desegregating America, and you look around our cities and schools, and it doesn't look like there's been much progress. So it's telling this long, generational story about why we are still a nation divided.
How long will it take you to do it?
Well, the fellowship's up in May.
All right.
So, I'm hoping to have a nice book proposal in reasonable shape by the early spring.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there are many types of investigative reporting. So, you live in this world. What opportunities are there, and what different types of investigative reporting are possible? From people in your generation, people are a few years out of grad school. What do you see people are doing? Are there opportunities for doing investigative reporting?
I definitely think there are, but I would say from both of our experiences, I would say to graduates, don't get obsessed with finding a job that has the word investigative in its title, right?
Yep.
Because I think there's ways to do investigative work where you're not a capital I investigative reporter.
Yep.
Or being part of an investigative reporting team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that I find pretty innovative that Propublica does, for example, is the notion of an engagement reporter. So they have reporters that, a very small part of their job is social media in the way that you think of as traditional social media. But then they really spend most of their time building audiences for stories, and I've learned so much from our engagement team in terms of how to use social media or different ways to find the people you need for your story and to really have a conversation with them. And whether that's, using social media for call outs or going directly, say, to churches in local neighborhoods when you're trying to find a specific population, I think those are techniques that are just evolving right now. And I really love seeing that, and I think that there are roles that may not look traditionally investigative that students could look into.
Right. But beat reporting jobs are still open where you can do some sort of investigations on your beat, right?
No, I think there are a lot of very exciting new nonprofit newsrooms emerging. But, and while that's great, that's a whole thing, that there's always going to be a need for students or, applicants with these skills in traditional newsrooms. And I think you can build on those skills while working as a beat reporter.
Traditional newsrooms meaning TV news.
Exactly.
TV news, newspapers.
Meaning not these, not the Trace or all of the new nonprofit newsrooms that specifically have this investigative bent, which are great, but most, reporters will never work in those, or, won't work in those newsrooms.
Right.
So it's, I think these skills are useful across the industry.
Is this a good moment to do investigative reporting?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think there's ever not a good moment to do investigative reporting for starters, but I do think that the ability of investigative reporting to sort of get under all the complexity and the muck and figure out what is actually important is something that's so crucial, especially when people are just being bombarded with so much information.
Yeah.
And I think we have a ton of reactive journalism, which is just sorting through the information coming in. And then I think investigative reporters sort of have the longer view of, what is a story that we need to be telling that nobody has heard about right now at this moment? And I think that those are both essential functions of the media that need to happen at the same time.
Well, this is also a time when there's been such an assault on facts and on evidence, right? Do you think that investigative reporting has a role to play in this very polarized environment where each poll has its own version of facts and truth?
Well, I think we already tend to document our stories much more than, say, a beat reporter, right? Like, not necessarily footnotes, but you link to the sources, and a lot of times, like there are a lot of good ways to draw on the documents that you use or the data that you use, and I think that is really important in showing that, like, sort of all of that goes into these stories before they're published.
There's a lot more I can see is like Propublica does this, and a lot of nonprofits, or even the New York Times and the big newsrooms with it, they put, or PBS certainly, they give you their source documents.
Absolutely.
And their interviews, and they show you how it's
No, that transparency is key, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
To building
Yeah.
credibility.
Yeah.
I just did a story with a colleague on clinical trials, and we had a whole separate written article on how we did the story and then published our database.
Right.
And I think that's the way a lot of investigative reporting is going now.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, let's end with like the most ambitious work you've done, or work that you would like to do, your dream story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, your book.
Your book.
Well, that's
Yeah.
the dream story.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess the most ambitious work that I've done so far is I had a story, 2 years ago. It was a cover story in The Nation magazine about how the federal government had neglected court-ordered desegregation plans from the wake of the Brown v. Board decision. So, 60 years later, there's still almost 200 of these cases active. And what I learned through calls to school board officials across the country and hanging out in courtrooms in,
Where?
Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia, and opening these case files for these desegregation court cases that have been going on for 60 years, and no one had ever opened that box before.
You mean they were just waiting
They
to
were
be
just
found.
waiting to be
They were
found.
waiting for you.
Right, and so the story was that the federal government had completely neglected these cases and had never really followed up and had never invested the resources and the manpower to make desegregation real across the country. So, yeah, that was an exciting.
So you read through all of these boxes of court records.
Yeah, right. It was trying to distill 170 some odd court cases into some sort of coherent narrative, and it was really.
But part of a lot of the work that investigative reporters do, isn't it, is finding patterns.
Yep.
And this is
Absolutely.
what you did
Exactly.
by reading.
Yep. By reading, by talking to school officials across the South and the country. Yeah, no, it was.
So basically what you found was a pattern of neglect.
A pattern of neglect, exactly.
By the federal
Yep.
court.
No matter who was president, exactly.
That desegregation cases just lay there and died
That
there.
the Department of Justice lawyer is in charge of making sure that these cases actually resulted in real change. That I can't remember the stats, but it was something like each Department of Justice lawyer was assigned 30 or 40 of these cases. So it's like there was never going to be a world where that was a real thing.
Whether these cases would go forward.
Exactly.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's like criminal neglect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
What about you, Caroline?
So the story that comes to mind actually maybe is not the most ambitious in terms of reporting technique, but it was a story I did. One of the last features I did at Bloomberg was about very sick babies who get stuck in hospital. And it had started from a conversation I had had with a friend who's doing her residency at a pediatric hospital, and she was saying, we have these really sick kids, they're usually machine dependent, and when they're well enough to leave the hospital, they can't leave because they need 24/7 nursing, and the parents can't find the nurses. And I was like, that's weird. And I'm like, the parents don't want the kids stuck in the hospital. They clearly want to bring them home. The hospitals don't want the kids there because they're taking up a bed, and it actually costs more to Medicaid to have the kids in the hospital than paying for nursing care. So I was like, this makes no sense. And at the time, I was trying to find an editor who would be interested in the story, and pretty much a bunch of editors said, well, nobody's interested in a Medicaid story. That sounds really complicated and boring. And I just I just felt like it was such an important story to tell that I kept saying, well, I kept looking for an editor until I finally found one that was like, okay, you can try to do this story. And then it was a challenge to find, first of all, a parent who could tell me their story, because these parents are completely occupied with their kids' care. So finding a parent who had the time to sort of go through their medical records with me and tell me their story coherently was the first challenge. But then the second was trying to get the hospital on board to also talk to me. And I actually had a parent who was like, yes, I'll tell you my whole story. You can fly out here and meet me. I booked my tickets, and I think a week before I was going to go, she backed out because she was scared that the hospital would be mad. The hospital kind of got nervous, and I was like, I don't want to get in the way of your relationship with your kid's hospital, so I just backed off from that. So it took a long time for me to find the pairing of a hospital and a parent that would cooperate. And then part of the story was that nobody counts these kids. We don't know how many medically complex kids we have. So doing the work to sort of give a scope of how big this problem is in the first place really required me to go around talking to a lot of different state Medicaids. And so for me, I was, and I was doing this around my regular news job. So it was a story I think I chipped at for about a year and a half.
Wow.
And when it was finally published, it was actually the most read story on the Bloomberg terminal that morning.
Great.
So I felt really happy that it got out into the world. Yeah.
What, the last question, what keeps you going? This is very hard work, right? And you'll have to be persistent, and stories don't pan out, sources back out, documents are not available. What keeps you going?
I just think I'm so lucky to have this job. Honestly, I think that's the first thing, that just the ability to have the time and space and resources that Propublica gives its reporters to really dig is a huge luxury, and I'm grateful for that. So that's one. And then I think the other thing is that these are stories I just care about a lot. I care about the victims in the story. I care about trying to bring an issue to light that people don't know about. And I think that is what drives me to just keep going, because I think it matters so much.
Right.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing anything else, right? Like that's what keeps me going. That I never questioned that this is an important job and that someone should be doing it. And I feel like at this point I've gathered some of the skills that mean that I should be one of the people doing it. Yeah.
And the last thing I'd add also is that I think the J School has helped me find great friends like Emmanuel. So we call each other up when I'm stuck.
Absolutely.
That's when I'll be like, I'm stuck, and we'll go out to dinner and talk about our stories. And I think that community is another thing that just helps us keep going. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Emmanuel. And if you ask me what keeps me going, it's having great students like you, year after year, doing great work, and still coming back to the school and being part of our community. So thank you so much, everybody, for listening to us. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me at ssc2136@columbia.edu.